My name is Nicole Janeway. I am the founder and CEO of Data Strategy Professionals. We do training and we also do fun events like this one. We're really excited to welcome our esteemed panelists to discuss current topics in data management, specifically within and across their fields of interest. So we have Dr. Su Rayburn representing analytics strategy, Dan Everett representing kind of the data warehousing, data lakes, data lake houses, big data space, Meenu Howland representing organizational and culture change, and Sunil Soares, who is our AI governance SME. So that's my quick introduction of myself and the panelists. I think we should start by having each of the panelists kind of give you a little bit more information about themselves, and then we will jump into some questions for the panel. So let's do this in the order that I just gave. So we'll have Dr. Su go first, and then we'll have Dan on deck for introductions.
Hello, everyone. This is Su Rayburn and from Atlanta, Georgia. Happy to be here to talk to you about a topic that is close to my heart. I'm currently the Vice President of Information Management and Analytics at Delta Community Credit Union. And I've been in this field for more than 25 years now. So a lot of experience across data, analytics, and now trying to come up to speed with all the fascinating and fun activity that's going on in the AI space.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we'll go next to Dan.
Thanks, Nicole. My name is Dan Everett. I've been in the data and analytics space for over 25 years. I'm excited to be on this roundtable with these great panelists and looking forward to talking about some of the shifting or evolving trends that we're currently seeing.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for the intro. Really happy to have you on. We will go next to Meenu, and then we'll have Sunil finish us off.
Hi, I am Meenu Howland. I am the CEO and founder of NeuroNova Consulting. I have been in the data governance strategy space for almost 20 years. I really have a strong passion for organizational change, getting people on board. Let's be real, data governance is selling, right? It's marketing and selling in its space. So I really focus on how to get organizations and companies to reimagine ways that they can actually implement these things while still being able to make sure that we're following all the right principles.
Awesome.
And yeah, this is Sunil Soares to round out the panel, longstanding data governance practitioner, now focused on AI governance and agentic AI governance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again to all the panelists. We're so thrilled to have you as part of this conversation. All right. So our first question is, how do organizations balance the push for rapid innovation with the need for robust data governance and ethical oversight, particularly as we're moving into an age where there's more and more AI projects? So I'll give the question first for Su.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, this is particularly interesting question for highly security aware organization like credit union, right? So we're highly regulated. So for us, this is always a tricky question to answer. And in my experience with working with them, successful organizations really treat governance and innovation as not competing priorities. They should really think about it as mutually reinforcing. And in order to do that, you have to think in terms of a governance framework that is lightweight, it's principle based, and something that you can embed into delivery workflows. And what comes to mind is a book I read several years ago called Non-Invasive Data Governance by Bob Steiner.
Friend of the show.
Yes.
We had him on in January.
Yeah, following some of those principles in terms of thinking about it more organically rather than trying to have a very heavy top-down approach. At least that's what works for us. And thinking about it throughout the life cycle, obviously. So what we have done is we've tried to embed data governance into agile value streams. Is something that we embraced last year. Having very clear role definitions, establishing semantic standards, model documentation, showing transparency in lineage mapping, etc. You're allowing your teams to innovate while ensuring that you have the right checks and balances, quality, privacy, with ethics, etc.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome answer. Data governance as an enablement function. That was so thorough. So let me just open it up to the other panelists. Does anybody want to chime in and add to Sue's answer?
I can. So I would say from a geopolitical standpoint, there's no balance, frankly, right? So if you think about the last couple of years prior to 2025, there's a lot of focus on AI regulation, right? Prior to that, data privacy regulation with the GDPR, the CCPA. And then going into this year now, from a geopolitical perspective, the US pendulum has swung in the other direction. There's no federal regulation for AI, and even this talk about an executive order to supersede all state level AI regulations. I'm not making a geopolitical statement, but there's a merit there that to say the US cannot be behind China, right? And the European Union a few weeks ago came up with omnibus legislation to water down the EU AI Act in general, right? So portions of it have already gone into effect. Article 4 around data literacy went into effect. Some of the regulations around general purpose AI models, but in general, it's watered down because the European Union is also saying, do we want to be behind the US and China when it comes to innovation? So what I mean by that is at the geopolitical level, regulators and governments are also thinking about this balance. And then at the corporate level, whether you're a nonprofit or you're for profit, you also have the same calculus, right? How much do we want to spend on throttling back innovation versus focusing on innovation? So I think thinking about governance, and maybe governance is not the right word, maybe it's enablement. Someone talked
Yeah.
about AI enablement. Think about it as a support function. But really, there's a lot of challenges when you start thinking about AI use cases, right? So agents, every company is implementing agents in some shape or form,
Mm.
but the agents might be using all types of data. Some of it might be PII, PHI, PCI. So they introduce all types of risks and all types of risk vectors. So now thinking through, do we need a registry of all our agents? What data are these agents accessing? Think about it. It's still the same concept of a data catalog, but now it might be an AI use case catalog and an agent catalog. So same principles, but apply different.
That's interesting. Sunil, you're talking about the agents now. You think about data lakes, right? The value proposition was throw all your data in there, right? And then we figured out they were swamps. And now we've done some governance more around the gold layer, around the key KPIs that we want to manage, but there's still a bunch of stuff in the raw layer, right? People really have no idea. I was talking to somebody and they're like, we've got a data set with 239 rows and 4,000 columns. We know the critical columns, but the rest we don't know what's in there. And now we're opening up agents. And if they go into that raw layer, right, who knows what's going to happen?
And I think this is where there's two balances here I want to call out, right? This is the technical balance of what actually exists from the technical perspective and how we set up our data custodian side of the house to really formulate, document, and have that lineage component. Then there's the business side and really having the business understanding it's creating data every time it touches a keyboard. It's using this information every time there's something, right? And looking at data as more than just a point in time or a thing, but looking at it from the holistic package of what that information put together means. And I think that as we move forward into an AI space, the ethic part comes into play there in a very different way. Because while I spent a lot of time in regulated industries from a energy and utilities perspective, I couldn't put regulated and non-regulated data together to make a decision. The law says I cannot. However, a lot of companies don't have that rules. And so now you're bordering on when it even gets into how you put those together for an agent to use. What are the ethics that your company actually feels are important? And how does that affect your employment brand? How does that affect your employee brand? How does it affect your company's overall perspective? So some of those risk factors, when you get into things like the ethics, come forward in a completely different light now, because it's not about whether or not we legally can do things. It's about whether or not it makes sense for what risk and perspective your company wants to take. And that's going to be really on the business to really have those conversations and present those topics in a way that's going to affect things differently than they may have done in the past.
Great. Okay, amazing discussion. And we're only a few minutes into this chat. One question that came up in the chat, which I think is very relevant to the conversation we're having so far. I've heard a few different terms used to talk about the governance function. Governance is marketing. We need to talk about the importance of data ethics. We need to enable AI initiatives, AI readiness. So I'd love to hear from the panel. Moving into 2026 and beyond, what should we use different language to define data governance? From your point of view, what is the best way to talk about and build a business case around this terminology? And what's the proper language for it? Do we talk about it differently as we move forward? So since we started with Sue last time, I will start with Dan this time.
So data governance is in the lexicon, right? It's out there, but it started for regulated industries. So it has this compliance overhang to it. And yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. My approach around these things has always been like, if you start with the business outcomes and then work backwards. If a CFO wants to prove liquidity and then they're going to do that by measuring days sales outstanding, what are the analytics and the data that are needed for that? And then talking about it in those types of terms, I think is a better way to get the business stakeholders involved in it. Cause I think the business stakeholders, oh, data quality, that's a technical issue, but it is not just a technical issue because the business people are the subject matter experts that really understand the business logic that should be applied to the data.
Definitely defining data value in the context of specific business initiatives. Meena and Sunil and Sue, do you guys have a perspective to add to that?
For me, I think the word governance is always that overall arching foreboding word. And I think that we've moved in a lot of ways as a maturity perspective from what I call passive versus active, right? And the more that we understand our data and that we understand the path and the life cycle that data takes to enable our businesses to get to those outcomes, more that becomes non-invasive, the more that becomes just part of the nature of what we do. And so when you think of data governance as a concept, I think for a long time it started out, this is my personal opinion, but for a long time it really started out as this like core thing that oversaw this, so that we kept everything together and there were a lot of guardrails in place. And with the evolution of how change management and from actually managing the data perspective, so the data management components have changed, where we can't have some of the same rigor, but we need those thought processes up front within the operating processes. It has shifted where governance really sits and what it looks like. If you look at the different models and the way that people define governance, I think there's a political and a company political alignment to what your company actually needs to do versus what you call it. And so I encourage people to really take a step back and look at how their company values things. Does your company value regulation as more important than sales and processes? Or are you a company that sales and processes, the actual like process improvement side of the house, Six Sigma stuff is more important? It can shift how you define governance for yourselves. And again, we may have a universal way of documenting that, but part of the nature for us to improve our companies is to define it for your company as well. So just something to think about as you think of the textbook version versus what you're actually operating in.
Great point. Thank you. Other folks, or would you like to go to the next question?
I just want to say that I agree with both Dan and Amina's perspective in this regard. In my mind, data and AI are not two separate things. They're very joined at the hip. One impacts the other. And keeping that value lens in perspective is the right thing to do. And you have to adapt it to what is important to your organization at the end of the day. So I agree with both their perspectives.
Thank you. That was a wonderful summary. Someone asked in the chat about education and literacy and how that plays a role in effective data management and governance. The follow-up question is, can companies that are immature in data literacy be mature in data governance? And we can go to Meena, since that would be like moving in order.
I think yes. You can have the conversation about being immature with data literacy and mature in data management principles, not necessarily data governance as a whole. So if you think of how the demo wheel looks and all of the components on it, without understanding data literacy or data enablement, that's very difficult to really oversee it. Again, going back to your definition of governance. When you think about data management and you think about some of the foundational components on things like our primary data or how we're focused on that core data that operates through our systems, yes, I think you can be very good at it. Regulated industries are a perfect example of that. They're very good at certain parts of data governance. That doesn't mean that they're mature from a literacy perspective all the way across the board, which is where some of this disconnect happens. And I think, like for me, I would love to have Sunil talk a little bit about what the shift looks like in the AI space. Because I think as you'll notice what's happening, the formality of the master data components and like what that looks like from a traditional data management piece, when you talk about literacy, has been one thing for a long time. And I think that completely shifts when you start talking about how you need to understand data, metadata tagging, and some of those core data governance components now that AI is in play.
Thank you, Meenu. But yeah, think about it, right? With data governance, I was talking to a highly regulated bank. They had only 2% of their data in their data catalog. So they were pretty mature from a BCBS 239 perspective. They had that covered, but only 2% of data was metadata was in their data catalog. So they were clearly not doing governance from a broader sense. When you think about AI now, AI agents and AI use cases don't just operate on the data in the analytical layer. So in whatever data might be sitting in Snowflake and Databricks, right? Dan was talking about like the gold layer versus the raw layer. So either the agents and the AI use cases might be operating on operational data, not just data sitting in Snowflake. So now typically when we thought about governance, we often think about governance from an analytical perspective, data going into reports, doing report certification, critical data elements. Now it's all that data sitting in the operational system. And it's also unstructured data. So now yes, AI depends on having good data, but the types of data that is going into these AI systems is much broader and much more diverse.
And I think that to me is where that literacy part becomes even more critical, because our perception of literacy that we had for the last 20, 30 years has now shifted. So it's not just about understanding your literacy from the traditional models. It's now figuring out what your new literacy needs to look like and how you're actually going to govern that in the future.
Right.
You use generative AI and you think about a copilot and it's fluent, but fluency is not the same as understanding. And so if you're not a domain expert, it might provide something back to you and oh yeah, that sounds right.
That's reasonable.
But if you don't have the context, the domain expertise to go, no, that sounds really good, but that's not quite right. Then you're making decisions on things that are actually going to lead to bad outcomes.
Yeah. I think this is really encapsulated in the term AI slop, but there's a whole new way to run down the wrong rabbit trail now that we have AI. And I am not an AI expert. We have at least one on this panel that is on me, but I have been explaining it to people. AI is always hallucinating. It's not like a person where it'll say something and I'm confident in this and I'm telling you the truth versus a person who is saying, I'm straight up lying to you. And physiologically, I'm responding to the words that I'm saying differently. AI doesn't have that. It's just constantly predicting the next word. It's supplying you with text or what have you, which is reasonable. And so it does put the emphasis on the human or on the system, perhaps, to validate, okay, is this real? How does this relate to the ground truth? So anyway, not to take us down a whole digression, but I think that's a helpful framework. And I just cringe every time I hear people comparing AI to interns or whatever, because I'm like, they're aliens. It's not the same. So anyway, the whole rabbit trail. But that brings us down to, I think, a question which is a good fit as our next question, particularly for Sunil as our AI governance specialist. Can you articulate, Sunil, the difference between AI governance and data governance? And I'm just going to add to this. In your experience, do you think that companies should think about these functions as two different teams? Should AI governance be embedded within the data governance team, or does it just depend? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so let's start with that. Who owns data governance? Who owns AI governance? So data governance is typically owned by the chief data governance lead, reports to the chief data officer. He or she may report maybe to the CIO in many cases. We've seen that. Sometimes into risk. AI governance many times is also owned by the data governance leader, the data and AI governance. But oftentimes now you have a chief AI officer who's coming in from the business because it's so important that you might have a chief AI officer and then obviously they probably own AI governance. So there's no good answer. I was at the International Association of Privacy Professionals a year ago in Brussels, and it was focused on AI governance. 80% of the folks there were general counsel or in that organization. So the data privacy professionals, they owned it.
Wow.
Now with the pivot away from AI regulation, which is AI governance is the guardrail, preventing people from doing things. As our president said 2 days ago, if I'm implementing an AI use case, I don't want to go to 50 people, 50 states and get permission. So leave that aside. But the point is maybe you're moving away, at least for the next 3 years, away from regulation to more enablement. And then it's probably the AI leader who also owns governance as a source of enablement. So I don't think it's settled in terms of who wants AI governance versus data governance. It's my opinion. The second part is, how are they different or how are they similar? I think they're quite different, but they're related. So data governance is all about governing data, making sure data is of good quality, sensitive data, regulatory compliance. Traditionally, it's been structured data, but increasingly we'll think about unstructured. AI governance, like the EUA Act Article 3, defines AI very broadly. It defines it as predictive modeling, machine learning, as well as Gen AI. They don't even talk about agents, but agents would be included. And in the EUA Act, they talk about Article 10 around data governance. So they actually do relate AI governance and data governance together. But there's also similarities because in data governance, you think about, I need to have critical data elements. You do that with AI governance too, because you think about a catalog of AI use case or AI agents. But then the EU Act says you need to have a risk registry around your AI use cases. You need to risk classify them. That's like a critical data element, but for AI, because what it's saying is you have prohibited use cases, which you cannot do. Fine. But then you have high risk use cases where you have to do a lot of extra work. And then there's another category called other. So it's very similar to a critical data element where we say for critical data elements, you have to do a lot of things. You might have lineage back to the authoritative data source. You need to do data quality. So the principles are very similar. You need to have a catalog of your AI use cases. And then you need to have critical data elements or critical use cases. And then you need to do a lot of things for those critical AI use cases, like you need to do bias assessments, you need to do a broader risk assessment, right? You need to map to the underlying data and you need to have an owner. Yes. So as Dan said, similar principles, different context.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. And I was going to say too, I really appreciate how you always bring in the regulatory context, acknowledging how that's shifted over time and how that's going to impact where this responsibility lives within the business. That's really very interesting perspective. All right. I keep getting great questions in the chat. So I'm going to go to this one next. We are talking a lot about AI, but we'll circle back to Sue as our first respondent for this question. What emerging technologies, for example, AI-enabled data quality, active metadata, automation, and governance, will add like agents as part of that? Which of these technologies do you think will have the biggest impact in the next few years? And acknowledging you're in financial services, a heavily regulated space, I am curious how you think banking industry is thinking about the risks and opportunities associated with these technologies.
Yeah, I definitely think that the penetration into the agent AI technology is really going to have a huge opportunities for the banking industry. And as Sunil or someone else said on the panel, there's a lot of inroads being made, these lot of experiments. And I think Europe is ahead in terms of using the agentic technology. Some of the companies have already gone to market with it. So in terms of what's happening in the US, I think we're still catching up. And in terms of the credit union space, where I'm much more familiar, I've been here with the Delta community for more than 13 years now. We are actively looking at agentic AI as something that could really deliver superior member experiences and bring value to our membership base. So definitely, I think that it holds the most promise in terms of being able to differentiate ourselves and to do things in a much more scalable and performant ways than we have been able to accomplish previously. So I put my bet on agentic AI, honestly. But the cautionary note for people in a regulated industry such as this, despite all the geopolitical overtones, I think is to make sure that you have a balancing focus on good governance from the get-go. That should become a priority alongside any kind of opportunities to innovate and derive value from agentic AI. Personally, I think that's where this is all going for financial services.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, other panelists, would you like to weigh in on this?
I think the question at the end, it says of data management practices. So just looking at it in the context of data management practices, I think AI augmentation is really going to help us scale. I mean, going back to the earlier comment, we've got so much data out there and a lot of our processes have been manual, right? So we've limited what we can actually go profile and get some quality stats around and govern to critical data elements. Having AI help us at least go out and at least profile like everything, and it can infer some technical rules for all those. So at least you get some sort of baseline of quality, even though you may not be actively managing it, you can at least understand what that is. And then you think about things like enabling business people to actually write the business logic rules. Right now, a lot of them don't know SQL, right? So they go to the data engineers, right? And then there's this back and forth between the subject matter experts and the data engineers as they're trying to write these business rules. Whereas you could use a co-pilot to say, help me write a business rule to ensure that the address, zip code, city are all accurate, right? You could do that, and then it could generate the SQL for you, and then you could give it to a data engineer and they could quality check that SQL, but it just accelerates that whole process.
That's a great use case. Yeah, because I can definitely imagine all the delay that's caused by business going back and forth with a data person and just taking that translation element out of it or outsourcing that rather to a generative model.
Augmenting. We're not
Augmentation.
outsourcing. We're augmenting. We're
Augmenting.
not outsourcing.
Augmenting that task.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Great. Meenu and Sunil, if y'all want to weigh in on this one. And Dan pointed out the original question was about specifically the impact on data management practice. So feel free to constrain your answer to that.
All the data catalogs now, pretty much most of them would have a feature around generating business terms.
Great.
Generating a glossary, right? Think about how much time that would take from a data steward who already strapped because data management is not their day job. They're doing
Right.
something else. They're in finance, marketing, whatever they are in, doing that work, or maybe auto tagging fields with sensitive data. One of our clients had 6 contractors spending time mapping manually in Microsoft Purview what fields are sensitive data. So potentially using AI technologies to be auto tag. That would be another example where we get a lot of efficiencies.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree. Experimenting within your own space is going to be really beneficial as we move forward. Obviously, stay within your lane where you're allowed to play, but being able to experiment yourself with what you can do in your own space is going to be important. And I think as we move forward and talk about what a data steward does versus what somebody in the business does, there's going to be a need to have a bigger understanding besides a data steward. In the future, we can't just lean on our data stewards to know everything about a domain because of all of this thing that is going to happen with unstructured data that is now going to be part of the critical information that something needs to have to run. And so playing with that in your own space and being able to say, hey, okay, I have a process. My process is order to cash. I'm in charge of order to cash. Help me understand, Copilot, by looking at all of my documents in my environment, who is involved in order to cash, what business people are, what documents. So even getting to some of those things to be able to walk backwards into what data is going to help us as we build some of these agents or we move forward from some of those data management components, there's going to be this shift between what was a traditional critical data element and what are these new ones, as Sunil was talking about earlier. And some of the ways that we're going to have to go about looking at those are not going to be in a traditional manner where we just ask a data steward to give me all the information about a domain. It just isn't going to work that way. And so we can lean into some of these AI components within our own businesses to start getting just everyday regular people to think about it from a different perspective. We're going to be able to pull some of these strings a lot faster.
Great. Yeah. Loving the tie in with the different roles that are involved and discussing the future job responsibilities as the technology changes. Another audience applied question, which is a little similar to one that we had written. How do you define a good environment for AI governance? So, what are the cultural factors involved? And as data practitioners within our organization, how do we support effective data governance from a culture environmental standpoint? And we'll go to Dan first for this one, if you would like to take a stab at that.
I thought you were going to go with Meena or Sunil, but I'm happy to. So I think I'm just going to talk culturally a little bit. Our biggest issue in data governance and AI governance is human behavior. We can define processes and we can have standards, but how do you actually get people to not just be compliant, right? Like I checked the box, but actually be committed to that type of process, that culture where we're continually saying that, look, data quality and AI governance are everybody's job. Everybody is responsible. It's not just here's our policy around the use of co-pilots, but like when you're actually using it, are you taking responsibility for the way that you're interacting with it and really evaluating what you get back from it? Or are you, like I said before, you just take the answer it gives you and you move on?
Yeah, I think that's very wise to say We have more access to information and tools than we ever have, and it is more challenging than ever to know how to use them effectively, responsibly, etc. So I really like how you phrase that. Okay, sorry, I did not mean to put you on the spot, Dan.
Oh, no, that's fine.
All right, so we'll go Meena, Sunil, Sue, if you guys want to chime in on this one around culture and the overall business environment supporting AI governance.
I can talk a little bit about what that looks like on the business side. I have two things. One, I think it goes back to the shifts and changes that have to happen between the traditional data governance mindset of how things work, who owns what, how you oversee things, and really bringing that back to involving everybody. We say things all the time like everybody should be in charge of data. Everybody should be conscious of these things. In all reality, nobody is held responsible and accountable in that fashion unless it's very specific data. But in the new world, things are going to be different. And so some of the language we use and how we think about things are different. I'll tell you, and this is probably going to ruffle some feathers, I don't like the word hallucination. And the reason that I don't like the word hallucination is it gives people an idea that AI is making things up. And psychologically, that is not necessarily true when we think about what's happening. It's using its available data to make a decision, just like you and I would. And I don't mean that in the traditional sense, but when we use hallucination, it puts it in a box all by itself. Like, well, it just decided something, whatever that means. But what that really means is that it didn't have the information to make the right decision or give you the right information back, which means that the information you need to be helping get into this space has got to be better. We have to be looking at it differently. We have to be more conscious about what it's getting fed in the first place. And so if we keep using these things like hallucination as we talk about things and we think about how it works, people just dismiss it like bots and what things do. So I try really hard for me to really get people into the mindset that, yeah, it is everything you touch, but that's because now everything you touch is being used. Before, when we talked about things like take SAP, we're like, some of this stuff's not a big deal. This stuff is a big deal. Now everything becomes a big deal. So I think it's just a different way of talking about our data culturally to get people ready for what that looks like from an AI governance perspective in a space. Because the more people think, oh, I only need to think about this thing and not this thing, the further away we get from a holistic understanding that everything we do and touch in the new world is going to be looked at.
I also quibble with the language more from the applying human. I hallucinate all the time personally. So I think that's my lens on it, but I'll let the panelists say more.
Yeah, I think we have to think about the automation, right? You can't do AI governance the way you did data governance. It's all manual and stewards, and they ignore half things because they don't have time. So you have to automate it. So how do you automate the cataloging of your use cases? How do you automate risk assessments? Human in the loop sounds great, but in reality, if you have agents that are making autonomous decisions, how do you actually introduce a human in the loop?
Yeah.
Thinking about maybe tweaking the instructions, adding automated guardrail technologies as part of the agentic process. Someone talked about governance as code. So as opposed to governance as people, governance as code, and then you have people overseeing the code. So that would be something to think about.
Yeah, I feel like we need a whole 4-hour presentation again so we can really dive into these topics around what is human in the loop? How practical is that? Are we just then shifting the blame to a specific person when it's really a systemic issue? Or are we willing to accept the limitations of this technology versus learning how to support it effectively? Okay, great. Really excellent answer in a succinct way to touch on those ideas and shift the perspective of what AI governance could look like. Awesome. Okay, so what do you think are the biggest skill gaps today? And I'm going to open this up for the entire panel, so feel free to jump in as you have thoughts. So, biggest skill gaps in data governance and data management teams. What are the competencies that our audience members need to be thinking about in order to be successful?
So this is in general. We tend to have a cult of technology mindset, right? So we're always thinking about technology and talk about T versus V-shaped people. I think we need a little more V-shape, right? It's not just about the technology. People use technology. So it's also understanding the social context, the cognitive psychology of, hey, Nicole, you've been writing these reports for your boss for a long time and you get all this praise about it. And now I come and tell you, hey, Nicole, you don't have to write those reports anymore. Aren't you so happy? And you're like, what do you mean?
That's my purpose.
right?
I
It's my
love to run.
purpose. So you think you're saying something good to them, but emotionally, you just threaten my sense of self-worth, right? And so understanding those things, if you want people to change and commit to the change, you have to understand that aspect of it, or like the business aspect of it, right? Hey, we're building this data. Great. What are you going to do to help me improve ARR or cross-sell or NRR or those types of things, right? So really expanding, you don't have to be an expert, but you have to understand the basics in these other areas.
Yeah. So go wide and potentially work on leadership skills, behavioral psychology skills. Do you have any specific resources, Dan? Tools, writers, thought leaders, etc., that you would
Uh,
recommend to folks so that they can start?
I think the Neuro Leadership Institute, they've got some really good content on that I think people would get a lot of value from.
Awesome. Great starting place. All right, other panelists. And the question was skill gaps.
I think one thing that people talk about is prompt engineering. So being able to write something very basic. If we all think AI is important and AI is going to make us better, I was in a session a year ago and a lawyer was talking about how AI is going to change his space. And he said, AI won't
Yeah.
replace lawyers, but a lawyer with AI will replace a lawyer without AI. So think about it that way. So a data governance professional with AI is going to replace a data governance professional without AI. So if you start with that, then you say, okay, how can I, as a data governance practitioner, become smarter about AI? And it doesn't matter about the technologies. Maybe you just start with ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever. How do you write a good prompt? Because these LLMs are so powerful. How can you actually write good prompts to get back what you want?
Yeah.
So for example, I was working with a client to build an ROI model. I saw a question somewhere about ROI models. How do we build an ROI model? So we are building a very complex model about how many monthly active users do they have? And then what percentage do those monthly active users in the data catalog spend looking for the data? How can they become more efficient? But we don't know how many monthly active users they had. It was a salesperson trying to sell into an organization. They didn't have day-to-day understanding of a monthly active user. So we wrote a prompt in Perplexity to say, I'm a sales professional and my sales commissions depend on getting good information. Given that, for such and such company, how many people do you think exist in the data analytics team? Something to that effect. So we wrote a prompt and the LLM went and looked at LinkedIn. It looked at different sources and came back with a number and gave us a range. So the idea is, how do you write good prompts? Because that's going to help you think through how to interact with the AI, how to get the AI to write better definitions for you that you can use in your data catalog, et cetera.
I think the irony of that, I always find that as you hear people talk about what they need, it ends up being business rules, right? So if you think about it, you're just teaching them how to write a business rule because that's the heart of a lot of these things. Okay, if this is my persona and this is how I want to do this and this is what could this be? And you end up getting a business rule out on the other side. And I think that's such a valuable thing, especially as we think about the skills and the more resources out there for people to learn prompt engineering, the better.
Yeah, these technical skills are absolutely important, and not being intimidated by the technology and really getting the curiosity in you to conquer your fear and acquiring these skills like prompt engineering, context engineering, they call it all kinds of things today. It's also leaning into the humanness aspect of it. There are certain things that only a human being can do. Human being recognizes ethics. The human being can understand a complexity in decision making. These things are not going to be immediately available through any kind of generative AI technology. And I think that's where we don't need to become like the AI. We need to understand our place in terms of really leading the way, in a sense, and outsourcing the grunt work to the AI and staying in control, in a sense.
Yeah, that is the vision. I was going to add for those that suggested practicing with prompt engineering, I think that's a really great idea. Was also going to say, I think it's important to continue to research prompt engineering best practices because they change all the time. And also to try different models. They have different strengths and weaknesses. If you get stuck on one use case and you're like, oh, AI can't do this, and I would just say to that AI, try better, try it again, or try a different model. Through LinkedIn, blogs, different business journals. I think you can find a lot of leading edge thinking about the techniques that work with the latest generation of models. So anyway, I just wanted to expand on that to add some practical things to do aside from obviously the initial step of like just trying it on your own. Just to start winding things down, I would love to have each of the panelists talk about a project that they've worked on recently or something that they're currently working on that they're proud of or that they would like to share with the audience.
Yeah, one of the things we're working on is agentic metadata. So you've got all these different systems, right? So you've got all these applications in any company. Even in your ServiceNow CMDB, for example, you have all these applications. Then you have some of these applications from most of them will have agents. Some of these agents are roll your own, some are off the shelf, and they all come with different levels of metadata. Literally every agent provider exposes their agentic metadata differently with different APIs. So almost thinking about a soft tool for agentic metadata. That is of interest and something that my team and I are working.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Definitely sounds interesting. All right, we'll go next to Meena and then Dan.
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time having a lot of conversations lately. I wrote a book in July called Unlinked, and it was really about some of these things that are unspoken and how companies operate and how really data is the thread to pull them together. And I've been really focused on trying to really get the message out as far as people go that AI is not replacing you. It may replace certain duties, it may replace certain things, but the value of you and what you can do and how you can help move the world forward, it still exists. Understanding how these pushes and pulls work in our different environments and how that works in a practical way in your business, regardless of where you are in your company, I think matters. So I really am passionate about that. I don't bring it up to plug the book. I bring it up because I really want people to understand that the world is changing fast. The Google effect was real. We're moving into the AI effect, and I wrote an article about that, but there's an entire thought process here of shifting, and I watch it with my own kids. I watch how different people in different places are with AI. And it's important that all of us practitioners really start to meet people where instead of just following all of the typical out of the box logic for things and really start looking at that human component as we move forward.
Awesome. And yes, this is your chance to plug the book. That
Okay,
is
well,
what this
I
section
do
is for.
I'm very excited about it. It's been great. I know, Nicole, you were able to do a great review of it, which I
Oh,
totally appreciate it. And yes,
awesome. Great. So we'll go Dan and then Sue, and then we will wrap up. Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, let's see. So I've got a couple of frameworks and methods for reducing cognitive bias and decision making. I
Awesome.
haven't written a book yet, but lots of posts on LinkedIn about it.
Mhm.
And then right now I'm working on a patent for governing autonomous agents in dynamic environments, looking at property graphs, linking operational behavior, semantic context, some trust dynamics. So that's currently what's taking up a lot of brain power.
Amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing. Awesome. And Sue.
So that was a tough act to follow. Looks like people have books coming out and patents and whatnot. I will say for me, when I started my journey 25 years ago, what is happening currently in the world today with AI? And when I moved into technology, I was in finance before coming to technology. And my reason for doing so was technology was becoming mainstream. So it was transforming industries and businesses. And I felt like that's where I wanted to be. And now it's coming full circle with AI. And that's so fascinating to me. And that's why I think agentic AI is really going to be a game changer for many companies. But the flip side of it is the governance aspects. I think that you really need to think about both throughout the life cycle of development. So what I am doing right now is we're doing some experiments with the agentic AI in our company. I don't want to talk too much about the details of it, but basically it uses some of the predictive ML models that we've built, helps automate and introduce processes that would really, I think, make a big difference in terms of member retention and member engagement. So very excited about that.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Sue, and all of the panelists for sharing your projects. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming and for sharing your insights. This has been a really engaging conversation, and we look forward to keep it going. Hopefully, everyone in the audience stays involved and follows these great thought leaders. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank
thanks
you.
so
This
much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.